Oh, no, it's not time for the riff yet. Promotional support for the podcast brought to you by the Power of Narrative Conference. The Power, celebrating its 26th year. On the last weekend of this month, it's like 2 weeks away. Hundreds of journalists are descending on Boston University. Keynote speakers include Susan Orlean, Connie Schultz, Dan Zach, Connie Chung. Listeners to this podcast get 15% off so long as you use that code CNF15 at checkout. Go to combeyond.bu.edu, use CNF15, and you'll get 15% off. That's book money, burrito money. What are you waiting for? Also consider pre-ordering the Front Runner. Maybe with some of that 15% you saved on your enrollment, you can order the Front Runner. Huh.
I felt like, I'm now the custodian of the stories of the people I love, and I need to really be careful about what I disclose and also how I disclose it.
Okay, not yet. Actually, it might have just happened. Did it? Oh, hey, CNFers. It's the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I speak to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. We continue with a slate of double features. Don't worry about it. And here we welcome Jaydra Johnson at Jaydra Nicole on Instagram, a native Oregonian from across the Willamette River in Springfield. She is the author of Low, Notes on Arts and Trash, and it won the Fonograf Editions Essay Collection Contest, judged by Maggie Nelson, whose publicist effed me over, but we won't go there. Low was one of my favorite books of the past year, and it surprised the hell out of me. I had certain expectation for it, and here are, meditations on art and garbage. Okay, fine. And while, yes, that's a component, the most compelling parts of Low are growing up low. Growing up what we might call white trash. And suddenly this book took a turn about class and the invisible labor class. There are brilliantly funny interludes and collages and photography, all packed into a book barely larger than a playbill. It's a remarkable piece of writing and a remarkable little book. Show notes to this episode more at brendanamaro.com. Hey, there you can browse blog posts, follow my anti-social media feed, as well as sign up for the monthly Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter for book recommendations and cool links to cool stuff that I think will make your life pretty groovy. There's now a companion weekly creative nonfiction podcast Substack that has more goodies like full transcripts, mostly accurate, and the parting shot of that episode that I've kicked over to that, and other podcast ephemera like 100 episodes ago, 300 episodes ago, 400 episodes ago, give you a little taste of the backlog without having to browse too far. You can find it at creativenonfictionpodcast.substack.com. The link will be in the show notes, but also in the podcast episode notes. And if you care, visit patreon.com/CNFpod to support the podcast financially. I just posted a little video inviting people to Pitch Club, where I will listen to pitches and see what I can do to maybe coach the best out of them. First rule of Pitch Club is we don't talk about Pitch Club, but the rule 3 is if it's your first pitch club, you bring a pitch. Right to the face. Jaydra earned a master's in education from Lewis and Clark College and an MFA in creative writing from Hunter College. Her work has appeared in Oxford American, Guernica, Gossamer, Atmos, I don't know, and Sweet Tooth. And here's an excerpt of what Maggie Nelson, whose publicist really effed me over, but we won't go there, had to say about Jaydra's piece. Jaydra Johnson's Low is part instruction manual, part genealogy, part art criticism, and part memoir. All of it pushing with urgency and necessity. It's written in wry, straight-ahead prose that hits no false notes and feels honest and earned at every juncture. I found myself rooting hard for its narrator, while realizing that there is no need, as she clearly found her way and is now our teacher. Well, fuck. Parting shot on weirdness. Let's just get right to it. Here's Jaydra Johnson. Riff.
You need to be a truffle pig.
But, it was a machete brandished.
I almost always have a very specific reader in mind.
I know. I sometimes wish I would have never done any of these things.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
It's been really beautiful and very surreal. I spent a lot of time emotionally preparing for it to come out and for nothing to happen. Because I know for most people who write a book, I think I did some Googling around, and it's like most books sell less than 700 copies. Even books that get like nominated for a Pulitzer or some of the bigger prizes that we know about in the literary world, like, yeah, most books sell under 1,000 copies. And
oh my God,
I'm sure, and I don't know how many mine will end up selling, but I just wanted to be really realistic about my expectations. And there's so much great work out there. And there's also so much work that just sort of is none of my business, just like stuff I would never encounter or pick up. And so similarly, like, why would someone pick up my little book? It's pretty niche, I think, in a lot of ways. And so I just didn't have any delusions about it being a huge success or anything. And technically it's not, but the reception has just been really warm. And I've had some great conversations with super intelligent people about the book who I feel like read it and really got it and understood what I was trying to do, like formally, conceptually, content-wise. And my friends have been hearing about this book for 3 years as I've been writing it and editing it and prepping for it to come out. A lot of them are reading it for the first time. I think I only had a couple friends who read drafts all the way through earlier in the process, and they're also texting me like, okay, wait, I knew that this was going to be good, but this is crazy good. And so yeah, I tried to go into it with no expectations, like either good or bad, and I've just been very pleasantly surprised and really touched by how many people are really sitting with it and enjoying it. And then I had like a big reading at Powell's that was super well attended, and that was
nice,
really heartwarming, and had a party, and then I crashed and got really sick.
So how did you like just lock into the form of it with these little riffs of like how to see, let's see, rituals to see trash like throughout, and then different patterns in the way you synthesize the whole thing?
I was working on this book while I was doing an MFA program at Hunter in New York, and a very early draft of it, I kind of made a zine because I grew up reading a lot of zines and really interested in that sort of subculture. And so I had photographs I had taken around my neighborhood of trash and a couple of collages that I made, and some of those collages ended up in the final book. I've always been really fascinated by the different forms that poems take. And so I was trying to take those concepts and put them into a creative nonfiction context. And so I turned in a zine basically for one of my workshops. And it's kind of based on also Claudia Rankine's book, Don't Let Me Be Lonely, which is a much less famous and earlier work of hers that I just think is really incredible. The early feedback was very much like, this is too all over the place. You need to rein it in a little bit and do less experimentation, which looking back at that zine, I'm like, oh yeah, I know what they mean. Yeah, I think it just emerged out of lots of different trials with different forms. The opening essay in the book was originally a play on I know everyone does this, but it was like a play on 13 ways of looking at a blackbird? 14 ways? Some number of ways in the teens. But it's a very popular poem to riff on. And I kind of later in the process, one of my thesis advisors was just like, okay, dude, you need to rein it in even more. And he recommended to me Hanif Abdurraqib's book, The Little Devil in America. And Hanif has like a crown essay in that. And I was really inspired by that. And he also has his little poetic interludes that are, I believe, in italics, and they're first person, and they're kind of these little memoir-like anecdotes. my thesis advisor was just like, you need to pick one form for these interludes that you're doing. And so I picked the instructions of like how to look at trash in different ways and tried to connect them to the essay that came before.
And of course, this book, like when I got the title, and it's like notes on art and trash. I just figured it was just gonna be like an artist taking on garbage as an art form, which there's elements of that. But I'm on a different trajectory than I thought I was gonna be on. I was on a different road, and so what was the crucible through which like this book was forged in that regard?
First of all, it really started from this moment where I had made a new friend, and I was like basically middle class by that time. I had a master's degree and I was teaching public school, which is like not the most esteemed profession in this country, but nevertheless like was relatively stable at that point in my life in a socioeconomic perspective. And yeah, I went to the river with this friend and we pulled around the corner and there's kind of this big beach, and she made a comment about like these disgusting white trash people on this beach and how just like fat and loud everyone was and why were they taking up all of our space. And I was like, I guess I made it. And it didn't feel very good. I was like, oh, I'm passing and this isn't great. So like that moment was kind of a turning point for me of like, oh, maybe I need to really rethink the way I've been kind of running away from my upbringing and thinking about it as this almost like death sentence. And in some ways I don't want to ignore or push aside the very real like material struggles of growing up poor, but it did set me on this path. And the book I proposed to get into Hunter was going to be kind of like Elizabeth Rush's book Rising, where I wanted to go to these different places on very much like reporting trips and kind of embed myself in places where trash and people were kind of colliding. But then my program started in 2020, so I wasn't able to go on these reporting trips. And I had to write about something, so I started to write about myself. And people really responded to it.
And what was your early experience of looking at your upbringing, head on?
I was very surprised by some of the things that my family members said when I interviewed them, first of all. And I felt kind of a big chasm open up between us in a way. I guess I just assumed they understood our class position and our sort of political position in the same way that I did. And I quickly realized that was not true. Yeah, I learned some really cool and surprising and beautiful things about my family from interviewing them. And they were so open and willing to talk to me about growing up and just even how they see themselves now. And I went into a creative nonfiction program and not a memoir program because I didn't want to write about myself. And so I did have a lot of resistance to and conflict about writing about my own life, and particularly about not sort of selling out. Like I didn't want to, there's a lot of things I didn't put in the book, and I didn't put them in very intentionally to sort of like protect myself or protect my family. And also because I was very conscious of not slipping into like poverty porn, basically.
It's hard for no one knows that a child might grow up to be a writer, in which case that everything that was once thought off the record has now on, might be on the record. And it's like, yeah, like you handling that deftly. Oh shit, I was on the record this whole time, and now suddenly all things could be aired. And it was to your point of not sharing everything. I imagine you're like, okay, I have to be really judicious about what I do share because no one knew at the time that I might write about this someday.
Yeah, totally. And also, during the writing of this book, I was corresponding with my brother who was in prison the whole time it was being written. And so all of our interviews and talks were on the prison phone and through the mail. And I think that also kind of certainly limited what he felt comfortable talking about. I don't know. I felt like, oh, I'm now the custodian of the stories of the people I love, and I need to really be careful about what I disclose and also how I disclose it. And I just didn't want to do wrong by them.
Speak to the challenge of interviewing family.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, I think me saying it was sort of an official interview for my book, having that container around it, I almost think allowed them to open up a little bit more than they might just if we were on the phone or in the car together or something like that. And part of that was them feeling like a little bit more, maybe they felt a little bit more weight attached to what they were saying. And so they wanted to be really earnest. They were so supportive of the book. And it really struck me. I know I already said this, but just how I really thought I knew how they were going to answer some of the questions I asked and how I really did not know. And I definitely left thinking, wow, I hardly know these people at all, and it made me feel maybe a little bit sad that I had been living with these assumptions, and it certainly inspired me to kind of enter into future conversations with them, even outside the container of like an interview for something I'm writing, with a little bit more curiosity, or they have just as complex of an emotional life as I do, and
what were some of the assumptions that were subverted or bucked by you having that open curiosity to hear them without judgment?
Interestingly enough, we had literally never talked about growing up poor. I hadn't talked about it with my mom. I hadn't talked about it with my brother. And those are kind of I have other family members, but those ended up being the main stories that came out in the book. I think I just expected them to go, oh yeah, we were totally poor. That was crazy. Like, remember getting free lunch, and remember the horrible WIC food, the Women, Infants, and Children like voucher program, and yeah, I remember this and that. And yeah, I write about it in the book, but my mom particularly like really pushed back against the idea that we were white trash. And there's an utterance from her in the first essay, and that's where the title came from, where she says, "We were never that low." Like, that line really blew me away, I think. And talking to my brother also, I assumed that he had an analysis to some extent that like the way that we grew up and the context we grew up in had some bearing on the fact that he ended up incarcerated. And I think he really thought about it as essentially personal choice, and did not see how any, political or socioeconomic factors like might have contributed to him being captured by that system.
And did you experience, or, given that you quote unquote like got out, and became and elevated your status and stature, did you experience any degree of resentment from family at all? Or
I haven't in any overt way, but it is something that I worry about. And I guess I'm just too cowardly to broach it with them directly, but I do wonder what they think of me. They show up for my success. Like, my mom has been at my book events, which is really sweet, and my brother made a guest appearance at my launch party. It was that was a total surprise to me. And so yeah, they've been very supportive. My dad read the book and said he liked it. He didn't say much else, which is totally fine. But yeah, it's something that I have guilt about. Have a lot of guilt. Yeah, I'm too afraid to ask them.
How do you reckon with that guilt and, proceed in the face of it?
Part of me thinks that the fact that I even feel guilty is a little bit condescending towards them, because if I'm feeling guilty that my life is better than theirs, then I'm saying my life is better than theirs. And who's really to say that? Particularly now, my brother, he's a logging truck driver that does like very high risk logging stuff. And, he just started his own business. He bought his own truck. Like, he seems to be like very happy in his life. And my sisters, maybe a little bit less so from the outside. I'm not as close with them, so I don't have as much insight into their sort of feelings about their life. But yeah, so there's that part of me that resists feeling guilty because of that, because I don't want to live as if, oh, my poor family members that like didn't get out, and it's just kind of a demeaning perspective. But then at the same time, it's like, I really try not to flaunt anything or appear snobby, or it's just something I'm thinking about a lot, like not sort of rubbing it in their face or something. But it's also something, I often felt as a kid that I was getting played against my siblings a little bit, because I was extremely studious and it was very natural and easy for me to like perform well in school and just follow rules and things of that nature. And so I think I felt a little bit like sometimes my parents would be like, why can't you be more like your sister? And it's like,
Oh no.
I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that, I don't want to be the person against which my family members are measuring like their lives or their success. So yeah, it's hard. And I constantly am like, should I send them money? Should I I don't know. If this book makes any money, I'll send them some money.
Yeah, you'd be like, oh shit, books don't make any money. I'm sorry, guys. I mean, my name's on the cover of this book and everything, and that looks all well and good, but none of us make anything in this racket.
Oh, it's like negative
Sorry.
money. It's totally like I'm paying to do this, which is amazing.
I like to say that a book is a great business card and the most expensive business card there is.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I know, it just gives you it's like, oh, that's nice. Here's this thing that I can show you. Let me scribble my email in it, and there you go. There's a 364 page business card or whatever it is.
That's exactly right. Speaking of 364 pages, my first thought when I held the print book for the first time was, it's so small.
I know, it is.
Because of how much work I put into this, the fact that it's physically pretty small was kind of, I don't want to say disappointing, but I was very much like, oh my God, what have I done?
Here's this thing. It's like the size of a playbill, and
Yep.
thicker than a playbill, but it's about that size. And it's like you think of all the emotional intent that goes into it and the weight of that, and then you feel it's like, oh wow, this is my life.
Yeah. And just hours and hours and hours of research and editing. And then, like when I was living in New York working on this book, like I was making a lot of sacrifices financially to have time to work on this. And so, yeah, I'm just like, well, here she is. Here's what I have to show for it. But I am really proud of the book and really pleased with how it looks. And so I don't want to I'm not talking crap about it, but it just was really funny to get it and be like, oh,
Oh boy.
it's very
Yeah,
tiny.
exactly. Yeah, I know. It's like you almost feel like it's underwhelming in a sense, but it shouldn't demean the accomplishment of it, because it may be slim and small in stature, but to me, to use a baseball term, as I always lean into baseball terms, it's like it's a heavy ball.
Mm. And I was very conscientious about that. And that was something that was really important for me to achieve, because I think all my favorite books are pretty short. I really wanted it to be tight on a sentence level, on the level of narrative, on the level of these different formal experiments that I'm trying, and then kind of as a whole package. So I was really thinking about all the different layers and trying to make it as perfect as possible.
And what was any unique challenges to this book as you were synthesizing it and editing it, cutting it down, blowing up certain things, and bringing it to pass and making it as lean as possible?
Well, I will tell you that my editing process was to read each essay out loud and then listen to it back.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that several times. And so one challenge was just getting incredibly sick of it.
Yeah.
But I think that, it felt, I talk about this sometimes as it felt very akin to making a sculpture. And I was trying to chisel away without chiseling away too much to where the conceptual part of it fell apart. It was really important to me that art came through enough as a theme in each essay. Something people have told me a lot about my writing as well is they love it when I'm writing about myself, and I'm resistant to do that, which is why I went with creative nonfiction as kind of a form to focus on is like, I want to be able to write about other people. And I'm really
Right.
fascinated by other people's lives, and particularly people that are really good at things or that do things with such intense passion and focus, and people that really give their lives to something. Those are the stories that I love the most, which interestingly enough, I've often fantasized about being a sports journalist because I feel like there's a lot of those stories in sports. And I love reading sports journalism, even though I'm probably the worst athlete on planet Earth. And I don't even remember the original question. I think it was about editing, difficulties with editing. But yeah, it's like I wanted to have a good balance of like my narrative and then, you know, the lives of these artists and the work of these artists. And I wanted it to also work for people who maybe wouldn't pick up as much on, that maybe aren't major literature nerds like I am and like a lot of my friends are, so that like they could still enjoy it even if they read it like almost as a memoir, that the formal experiments wouldn't be so distracting or so dense or sort of like, I don't know, esoteric or something that they couldn't access.
Yeah, and to your point about, you know, locking into certain people who have a real passion or a singular vision, I think of the one woman you play off of in this at the Department of Sanitation in New York. Yeah, talk about her and what made you lock in to her and the work that she did over the decades.
Part of my research for this book was reading a lot about landfills and the garbage system and how that works, because I was initially, as I said, interested in this as a book that's about physical garbage as well, and I think some of that is preserved in the book. But yeah, she was someone who I discovered through actually looking at the New York Department of Sanitation and kind of clicking around on their website, trying to figure out where the trash goes and like what landfills it was actually being sent to. And it was on one of their pages, maybe a press page or something like that. But I saw her name and I was like, oh, who's this? And the more I dug into her, the more fascinated I became by what she had done. And I think that's where the book it kind of unlocked that this book was going to be about art and trash, and not just trash in this very broad sense, but kind of like focused in a little bit more, because she talks about like name calling. She talks about maintenance work, which is like one of her big guiding principles as an artist, is like illuminating and making visible and beautiful the everyday stuff that the working class is doing and the art that people are making that isn't necessarily institutionalized or called capital A art. And she is very much like, well, why not? And I just thought that was so brilliant and inspiring, and also very much what I was trying to do. So she became kind of a fairy godmother or something for this book.
Right. Yeah, and when you locked into her, that what kind of reflection did she impart on you, just casting your gaze back to your childhood and, you know, just the drudgery of the working class that you grew up around, and those people in noble work who are just like, my God, it's just so hard to like pick yourself up and sometimes to get out of bed. And it's just, I imagine that just her work and her work on maintenance work and all this, that really cast your reflection back.
It really did. And that's why I ended up, you know, the me part of that essay is my time spent working as a maid when I was young, and the fact that my mom had been a maid and my grandma had been a maid, and I hated that job. I hated that job so much. And partly because it felt so demeaning, or that I was demeaned through the job. And because it's not like I think that housekeeping is not valuable work. Like, obviously it is. But like the way I was treated by people in that job was probably the worst of any job I've ever had. And I've worked in fast food. I've worked in lots of different contexts where one might feel that way. But there was something about her work that allowed me to look back on sort of my birthright of like being a maid, basically, and starting to pick that apart and interrogate it. And it was a really beautiful experience to think about my mom and grandma as doing a dance or doing some kind of performance art while they were cleaning. And so yeah, it was kind of like redemptive, I guess. And it really did start to open up my perspective on also the art that I had encountered as a kid, which I felt very judgmental about. Like, there was this tire store on the corner that I write about, this intersection we passed all the time, and they had like cut up tires and spray painted them. So, and they were selling them as like flower pots. And I just thought they were so ugly and embarrassing and trashy. And I was like, oh, but like, this is people making art out of what's at hand, and how beautiful to take the materials that are around you, and including like a bald tire and an old can of spray paint, and like try to really make something out of it. And so it helped me also like critique myself in that way and be like, okay, what am I still holding on to in terms of like this internalized, I guess, classism, and with respect to art, but also with respect to other things, and help me kind of start to take that apart. An early like sentence I wrote on a sticky note and put it above my desk or something was, make it so beautiful they can't look away. Because I really did want part of this project to be like people seeing things that they would rather not see. And a lot of those things are very sad or difficult for whatever reason to look at. It was important to me to make the book beautiful and engaging on an artistic level so that people would keep reading. Because if I just wrote down all the horrible things I learned about garbage and about the way people are treated, probably no one could finish the book, because it just would be like too sad and overwhelming. And so a big part of this project for me was making that kind of thing visible, not just visible, but also beautiful, so people could really look at it in a sustained and thoughtful way.
Yeah. There is an arresting quality to the book, and a very propulsive quality to the book. And I just I'm curious as to how, and you're kind of speaking to it, about how you achieve that, and how you kept that as kind of a North Star to make sure that it wasn't too downtrodden, but it was illuminating in this way that was unique to the research you did, but also through your own personal rubric.
I don't know if I'm going to have a great answer to this, but it was to some extent intuitive or like emotional in a physical way of like how I felt while I was reading it back. And I tried to have each essay, go on this kind of meandering path, and sometimes it goes into like a more depressing part, but I was thinking about maybe like a build and release of tension throughout. And I really wanted each essay to end on not a high note, but a statement that would act almost like I don't know, like when you fling a rubber band or something, like just kind of urge the person towards some kind of action, whether that would be turning the page or sitting and thinking about it further. I tried to really have the last paragraphs be redemptive and triumphant, and really cast the rest of the essay in that light, so that even if you'd been sort of reading about a lot of sad, crappy stuff, by the end, the ultimate, feeling that you're left with is one of maybe not hope, but certainly rebellion, or just I don't know, just some energy. I really wanted the last, the end of each to have energy. And then the little interludes are supposed to be, and in some ways they're very earnest, but they're also supposed to be kind of funny.
Yeah.
And, poking fun a little bit at the seriousness of performance art, poking fun a little bit at, the lies that we're told and the lies that we tell ourselves about material and metaphorical garbage. And I think those really help as well to kind of keep up the moment. Because listen, Brendan, I know how long those essays are. I read them out loud. I remember the first time I read the first essay out loud and it was like 52 minutes and I was aghast. I was like, no one's going to read this. But I guess, people are reading it, which is fantastic.
Well, to your point of one of the interludes being pretty funny, it's it's when you're buying stuff and you realize, when you're buying anything, how much you're actually just buying trash too. And you throw all the plastic in your bathtub and then hop in the bathtub and and then note how it imprints on your skin. Consider getting a tattoo of the imprint. I was like, oh, that's pretty funny. I thought that was, like, in an absurd way, I thought that was pretty hilarious.
Yeah, they're supposed to be like pointing out absurdities and all that.
Yeah.
I like the one that's about like, my mom lives outside of a small town and she doesn't have garbage service, so they have to go to the dump, and so they always have this big pile of trash at their house, and some of it they burn, but yeah, I think it was just such a fertile place to explore high and low art, which is like a big part of this book as well, and how those things can collide. And back to Meryl Letterman Euclides and her work with the trash, it's like bringing art to the garbage pile at my mom's house, is one of these this is Rituals to See trash number 3, I guess. It's like, oh yeah, like take that trash and make a little sculpture garden and then document it, and then, make paintings of the photos and show them in a gallery funded by fracking profits. And yeah, so I was just like having a bit of fun because I realized that there is a lot of pressure. Maybe instead of tension, I was thinking about pressure in the book a lot, and how to like turn the pressure up and down in terms of like the amount of information I was giving or the quality of it, and like the emotional quality of it. And so that was like a pressure release, basically. Like, okay, you just read this really long essay that's pretty complicated, and let's have a little fun break.
Yeah, I like those. I dug it. It was like you said, a kind of a pressure release, and it allows you as a reader to reset and recalibrate. Just as an experience of turning the page and seeing more white space, and then seeing a list. You're like, okay, this is changing my eye level and changing my experience with it physically, and I appreciate that when I come across it in a book.
Thank you so much. I had a lot of fun with those, just writing them. And when I was shopping this book around before it like won the contest, I was sending it out to agents, and I didn't have those. I don't think I had those in there. Did I? Yet I was originally shopping it around as much more of a memoir, and it was actually called Other People's Toilets, which is the title of the second essay. And I didn't like really have the art focus on it yet. Like I didn't even realize that was what I had been doing all along, and like that I was really doing art criticism and cultural criticism. I don't know why I didn't realize that, but I didn't. And my MFA advisors kind of encouraged me to make the book less weird, and so I was shopping around this like less weird version of it. It didn't have the collages in it. I don't think it had the rituals in it. It was just the essays, and I was getting very nice rejections. They were like, oh, this is cool, I don't want it. And then this person said, hey, this needs to be like more weird or less weird, but it's in this kind of odd place that isn't working. And I was like, she's so right. And I put the manuscript away for a while, and then I was just on Instagram and saw like Fonograf creative nonfiction contest, like, do you have a really weird manuscript sitting around? Like, send us your worst. It's judged by Maggie Nelson. And I was like, oh, like I have something like that, and at the time it was only 99 pages. And yeah, I like opened up the document and I put the collages in, and I put the rituals in, and I like put this other essay that I had written about TLC that ended up being published in Oxford American. And then so I ended up taking it out of the book because it had been sort of rewritten to be in a magazine. It had a very different voice than the rest of the book. So I did end up taking that one out and replacing it with some other stuff. But yeah, I just had a feeling. I was like, I could win this. And I don't know, it's delusion. It's, delusional, but it's only delusional till it doesn't work.
Oh, for sure. And it just goes to show you the degree of luck and serendipity that comes into play, and you submit it. And it's just, who knows what would have happened if you never stumbled across that? Like, you could be still struggling to find a home for it, or maybe something else would have happened. But this happened to happen. It's just, I think it's important for people to keep that in mind, that sometimes you just need to keep doing the thing you're doing, and then these weird doors will sometimes just materialize, right?
Totally. And that's something that I learned being in New York for sure, is like, nepotism aside, it is so much about luck and finding some way to do the work long enough and often enough, and to continue being open to and putting yourself out there enough that, it's 50% hard work, 50% luck. That's a very reductive and simplistic way to think about it, but for me that's been true, and I've kind of watched it be true for other people, like, because there's plenty of people out there, and this kind of goes back to talking about the release and my very moderate expectations that I've had about it, is like, I know that there's so many people out there making incredible stuff that's not getting recognized, that no one's seeing, that for whatever reason, it's just not their time. And it's like, I guess this was just my time. I think my work is good. I put a lot of effort into it, but I don't think it's like the best book that's going to come out this year or something. It's like, there's just so much great work out there, and there's artistic genius like all around us. And, that includes a lot of us working class artists who are making this stuff, and some of it languishes, and it shouldn't, but not all of it does. This year I took a job teaching dual credit, like college classes at a public high school. And, I haven't written anything since the beginning of the year, because the job is so emotionally and creatively and temporally demanding that I haven't been able to write anything. So I'm in it, but like, I hadn't had health insurance in a really long time, and I spent down all my savings, being in New York and trying to get this writing career off the ground. And I also have like a visual art career, such a weird word, but
Right.
visual art career. And I haven't figured out the money part yet, basically. And so this year I was like, okay, like, this job kind of presented itself to me, and I was like, I need to take, it's like the responsible thing to do. I had been about 5 years working like very marginal jobs and surviving on very little in New York City. And so this is kind of like me replenishing that side of things. And I was talking to a student actually the other day after class, and he is like visibly very obviously poor, and he's so brilliant. And I just was like, we need to talk about what you're gonna do with your brilliance and your potential, because it is so easy for people like us to just get really eaten alive, and for that all to languish. And that's something that is really heartbreaking for me, and I think about it a lot, like how many. But it's also very beautiful and inspiring that people are making art and making a way and making life in their own ways with what they have, which is, part of the thesis of the book, is like, don't look down on trash people, because you never know what they're really up to. It's really hard out here to be a working artist and not have, even if you have some financial resources, it's still really hard, and there's no guarantees. And like, for some reason, we do it anyway. And
Yeah, well, and to your point about not having written anything this year, I had this quote from Raymond Carver I saved because I kind of wanted to get your impression on it, because it's a good quote. But then you saying not having written anything, it actually is pretty germane. Like, he said, when I'm not writing, it's as if I've never written a word or had any desire to write. I fall into bad habits. I stay up too late and sleep in too long, but it's okay. I've learned to be patient and to bide my time. And just hearing you talk about not having written, and we were talking about patience and luck and sticking it out, I wanted to get your sense of that, of just the patience that maybe you're granting yourself, the grace you might be granting yourself, given that new job, trying to figure out your place, book just came out, and it's just not beating the shit out of yourself because, you're not churning out essay after essay, month after month.
Totally. And, I just was talking to a friend on the phone this morning about my fear that there will be some momentum around this first book. And then, I do have a proposal and some material for a second book, and I was able to actually meet with an agent about it the other day. So it's like there's a little something there, but I'm not making any progress. And I have this fear that there's going to be momentum around the first book, and then I'm not going to be able to like take advantage of whatever luck might come my way next. And I also do beat myself up a lot about, or maybe it's not beating myself up, but I have this like trying to figure it out. Like I'm like, okay, well, like where can I find the hours and how can I, it's like trying to solve a puzzle, but you don't have all the pieces. So it is just something I wrestle with a lot. Also, though, my friends are always like, you're working while you're not working, like thinking about the years and years of experience and thought and reading and conversation that went into Low. A lot of the experiences I'm having now, I know will end up being in service of the next book, which is tentatively about like difficult art. Like, why do people make and consume art that's hard in some way? Like whether it's like violent or ugly or kind of unintelligible or whatever. Like people do really difficult stuff all the time. And I'm doing difficult stuff right now, and you are too. And yeah, there's just something there. And I know that particularly the experiences I'm having like professionally right now are going to contribute to that in some way.
Yeah, at times it's hard to keep in perspective like the long game of it. When you want things to happen yesterday, and it's like and to have that patience is it's very hard, especially when you're just trying so hard to get some degree of a toehold. And it just feels like I've used this before. It always, and some of the resentment I always felt and routinely feel, but I've metabolized it far better than I used to, is I always felt like I was walking up an escalator going down and just going nowhere. Meanwhile, it felt like everybody else was just on the one going up and walking up, and they were just blowing me away. It's frustrating dealing with that. But the fact is, everyone is kind of on your side of the escalator. It just feels like everyone else is on the other one. But it's really frustrating because you're just trying to make a go of it. It just feels like everyone else is making it and you're not. And it's like, all right, you just gotta somehow put your head down and weather that insecurity and weather that storm.
That is so true, bestie. Like, particularly when I was in New York, and there was a period of time where I was trying to write for money. Like, and I did end up getting some bylines and whatever, but for me, that was a losing game. Like, as I hope is obvious from the book, like, I'm not a very commercially viable writer in a lot of ways. Like, what I'm doing is not necessarily in line with quickly consumable and like easy to create stories that a lot of people are gonna like. And I'm not like trying to demean myself at all, but just like it was impossible for me to come up with enough pitches. But like other people I knew were getting pieces, and I was just like, what is going on? And I'm poor and I need money. And like, yeah, so I felt that a lot at the beginning. And now that I've been through also the feeling of like, okay, I have a book deal, and that sounds very impressive, and I'm editing my book, but also like I'm a substitute teacher, like, which is what I was doing all last year while I was kind of figuring out where I was going to land in terms of like New York, LA, Portland, of substitute teaching. And I was just like, the material reality doesn't always keep up with the success part either. So even when I'm having publication success, it can still feel like feels so precarious sometimes, and still like being on the down escalator walking up.
To your point of being poor in New York, it's like you write about growing up poor, and then you kind of you go through and you go to college, you get the master's degree, and you got these credentials, and then like still poor. It's like what the fuck?
Totally, yeah. And then like being in New York too, it's like actually was very liberating for me because I realized what a joke it was for me basically to try to be upwardly mobile, because the type of wealth I was interacting with there is so different than the type of wealth I'd been interacting with in Portland. Like, it was like people with Carnegie money, people with just like, I mean, such a different life from what I grew up with. And that really helped me write the book with clarity too. Because sometimes I gaslight myself and I'm like, was it really like that? Like, was it really that bad?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, my dad had a job and like, but going to New York really clarified some of this class stuff for me that I'm writing about, where it's like, oh, it's so much about just when and where you're born and into how much wealth, and not that necessarily determines your future, but that it's less escapable than they would have us believe. And then that's not necessarily it's not necessarily a bad thing in terms of like, you don't have to be fatalistic about it, but I think I thought of myself certainly as not a person who was living under the fantasy of the American dream or anything, but yeah, being in New York and being around the kind of like wealth and privilege I was around there, definitely whatever, vestiges remained of that for me were stripped away.
Oh, nice. Well, I want to be mindful of your time, Jaydra. And one of the things, as you know, I think from listening to the show, I love asking guests for a recommendation for the listeners, just something that's bringing you joy or making your life easier, just making you happy. So what might you recommend for the listeners out there who are looking to zhuzh up their lives or just make something a little easier, a little happier?
I really recommend binge buying books on eBay. It's a great place to get affordable used books. The conflict I have recommending this is that obviously like it's not necessarily supporting presses or authors. However, I just love to be really wild and free roaming with like what I'm reading and discovering new people all the time. And I used to keep this very long list of books to read. And instead now I just kind of turn around and buy a $4 copy on eBay right away and let it come. And that way I'm not beholden to like the deadlines of the library. And also I just have time to really spend with like the physical copy of the book and see if it's something I want to commit to. So yeah, with some reservations of like, then if I do like the book, I try to support the author, or if there's like a small press to support, I do that. But yeah, I think that giving myself permission to just like be inspired in that way is really helpful to me in my creative process, and also just like my general joy as a human being. And then I just don't feel that bad about getting rid of them either, because I'm like, oh, it was $4, so
right, then
I can go put them in the free library or some, pass them on to someone if it's not really my thing. So
oh, fantastic. Well, Jaydra, I'm so glad we were able to talk, about your book and about, writing and the writing of this book. And I loved it to death, and I've recommending it to a lot of people I know. And it's just it's a really wonderful book, and I wish you the best of luck with it. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate your time and inviting me on and everything. It's been really wonderful. Longtime fan, as you know.
Oh, the different song now. Actually, whatever. Thanks to Jaydra for reaching out to me last year, for coming on the show, and for being patient. We recorded this several months ago. She expressed how she had been a listener for many, many years. I think going back to 2017, like she's an OG listener. So it's always nice to hear that people not only found it at a long time ago, but they've stuck around. That says something. It does say something. Thanks also to the Power of Narrative Conference's promotional support. And if you could be so kind, consider pre-ordering The Frontrunner. Jaydra hit on a great point about her book either being too weird or not weird enough. And when it comes to any art, especially when you're dealing in essay or podcasting, you gotta go weird. And that doesn't mean Weird Al or talking like Pee Wee Herman, like, it just means be distinct, be singular. This was a great problem I experienced in my MFA program, where I tried to sound literary. I wanted my writing to sound artful. It's what you might call the dreaded MFA voice. And it took a few years of for me to scrub that out. There was this time when I sent the stupid email to 3 friends of mine, weekly roughly, about this drinking game, Beer Die, doesn't matter. We took this game way too seriously for way too long. I'm talking like way into our late 20s, even maybe early 30s a bit. When I should have been thinking about getting some velocity down the runway for this thing called a career. I called these little missive newsletters, and my best friend, who had read some of my, quote, artistic writing from my MFA manuscript, told me, he said, "Hey, B.O., I don't want to insult your book, but these emails you write is some of your best writing." And he made a great point. It was in my voice. I can be funny sometimes, right? Especially on the page. Maybe not so much in person, because I'm not really great on my feet. But there was an energy on the page when I was making fun of all of us that was decidedly lacking in my literary journalism project. Now, of course, if you're dealing with sober material, you're not going to go bang, zap, bahooga all over the page. That would be weird. You have to read the room. But it was a valuable lesson in voice and style. How would you write your book or a book of essays or anything for that matter if it was just an email to your best friend? Same goes for podcasting. Yeah, the interview podcast has a lane. But when I hear people, or when I see people following the same speed limit, trying to sound like, I don't know, an NPR interview or something, I'm like, this is just boring. It's why I use heavy rock music, even if it's distasteful to some people. It's why I, God forbid, change the tone of my voice here and there and don't drone on the mic. You can inflect. Your voice is an instrument, dude. It's why I occasionally interject in the middle of the show, be it to offer context, a fact check, or a little addendum. It's why I put the parting shot at the end of the show and don't weigh down the start. It's why I'm unafraid to swear. It's why I'm unafraid to tell you how shitty I feel on an almost hourly basis. Hold on, I'm going to check my blood pressure right now. Oh, it came back 144 over 94. That's an improvement on the other day. It was like truly, it was 160 over 101. In that red zone right before they tell you to go to the ER. Hey, I'm trying, man. I'm down to 1 cup of coffee a day and almost no alcohol, and I'm not happy about it. I'm irritable, dude. Point is, if someone can catch an interview of so-and-so or read such and such, if AI can do it, then why do I care? If Jesse Eisenberg or Aaron Brockovich are being interviewed by a lot of people, and yeah, I'm going to side with Mark Maron because at least Mark has a voice, a personality, and a point of view. Same goes for writers. Hanif, Elena, Elisa, George, and now Jaydra. I know I'm in for a ride if I see their name with these writers because they're weird. If you're not flying your freak flag, dust that shit off, would you? Stay wild, CNFers, or weird. And if you can't do, interview. See ya.